The moment I walked into my parents' house that Christmas morning, I knew something was wrong. The silence hit me like a slap. 23 family members were scattered around the living room, but when I appeared in the doorway, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to me. My mother's face went pale. My father couldn't even look at me. And there, sitting in the center of it all like a queen on her throne, was my sister Vivian. She wore that same smirk she'd perfected since we were kids, the one that meant she'd won another round of our lifelong war. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Look who decided to show up. Tell me, Zara, how does it feel to be a complete fraud?" That's when I realized what she'd done. The rumors, the lies, the carefully crafted story she'd been spreading for months about my military career. She'd finally found a way to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. But what Vivian didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 48 hours, everything would change. The truth would come out. And the sister who'd spent her entire life trying to tear me down would finally understand who she'd been messing with. This is the story of how my own flesh and blood tried to bury me alive, and how I rose from that grave stronger than she ever imagined possible. Growing up, people always said Vivian and I looked nothing alike. She had our mother's delicate features, the porcelain skin, the golden hair that caught sunlight like spun silk, the green eyes that could charm anyone within minutes. I, on the other hand, had inherited our father's stronger jawline, darker complexion, and what my grandmother diplomatically called a more serious disposition. But the real difference between us wasn't physical, it was ambition. While Vivian spent her teenage years perfecting her makeup techniques and collecting boyfriends like trophies, I was in the garage doing push-ups until my arms shook. While she was planning her next shopping trip, I was studying military history and dreaming of serving my country. Our parents never hid which daughter they preferred. When Vivian brought home a B-, it was celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. When she announced she was majoring in communications with a minor in social media influence, they beamed with pride. When I told them I was enlisting in the Air Force, the room went silent. "Sweetheart," my mother had said, her voice carefully measured, "don't you think that's a bit intense? Maybe you could try something more feminine?" Vivian had laughed from across the table. "Seriously, Zara? The military? You do realize you're not actually a man, right?" I should have known then that this was just the beginning. Basic training at Lackland Air Force Base was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The Texas heat was brutal. The drill sergeants were relentless, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest for the first 3 weeks. But something inside me thrived on the challenge. While other recruits broke down, I got stronger. While they struggled with the discipline, I embraced it. By week 6, I was squad leader. By graduation, I had earned the Academic Achievement Award and the Physical Fitness Award. The girl who had been called too intense and not feminine enough was suddenly being praised for exactly those qualities. I specialized in intelligence analysis and was stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The work was classified, demanding, and exactly what I'd always dreamed of doing. I was analyzing satellite imagery, briefing senior officers, and playing a small but important role in national security operations. Meanwhile, Vivian was posting Instagram photos of her coffee and complaining on Facebook about how hard it was to find the perfect aesthetic for her lifestyle blog. But here's the thing about family dynamics. They have a way of following you no matter how far you run. The phone calls started about 6 months into my first deployment. "Zara, honey, your sister is worried about you," my mother would say during our weekly check-ins. "She's been reading online about PTSD and how difficult military life can be for women. Maybe you should consider coming home." At first, I brushed it off. Vivian had always been dramatic, and I assumed this was just another way for her to get attention. But the calls became more frequent, more urgent. "Vivian says she's heard things about your unit," my father added during one particularly uncomfortable conversation. "Inappropriate behavior, harassment. Are you sure you're safe out there?" I tried to explain that my unit was professional, that I was excelling in my role, that I'd never felt more confident or capable. But I could hear the doubt in their voices. Vivian's poison was already working. The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself properly. Most of my work was classified. I couldn't tell them about the commendations I was receiving, the important missions I was supporting, or the respect I'd earned from my colleagues. All I could say was, "I'm fine," and hope they believed me. They didn't. By my second year of service, Vivian had perfected her campaign of destruction. She'd created an entire narrative about my military experience, and she was spreading it to anyone who would listen. According to her version of events, I was struggling with addiction, suffering from severe mental health issues, and barely hanging on to my position. She calls me crying in the middle of the night, Vivian would tell our cousins, her voice heavy with manufactured concern. She's not the same person she used to be. The military has broken her. Ma. She'd screenshot random articles about military suicides and PTSD statistics, sharing them on social media with captions like praying for family members serving overseas and the hidden cost of war. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like she was a caring sister worried about her troubled sibling. The truth was that I'd never been happier or more successful. I'd been promoted ahead of schedule, selected for advanced training programs, and was being considered for positions that would fast-track my career. But I couldn't share any of this without violating security protocols, so I watched helplessly as my sister built a wall of lies between me and my family, brick by brick. The breaking point came during my third Christmas home. I'd been selected for a special assignment that I couldn't discuss, but it meant I'd be out of communication for several months. I wanted to spend quality time with my family before I left, to rebuild some of the bridges that Vivian's rumors had damaged. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention. My parents had gathered the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, ostensibly for a holiday celebration. But within an hour, it became clear this was something else entirely. "We're all worried about you," my Aunt Elena announced, her eyes glistening with tears. "Vivian has told us what you're going through. We want you to know that you can come home. You don't have to keep pretending everything is okay." I looked around the room at faces filled with pity and concern. These people who had once been proud of my achievements now saw me as a broken victim who needed saving. "There's no shame in admitting you need help," my grandfather added gently. "Your great-uncle struggled after Vietnam. We understand what war does to a person." That's when I realized the full scope of what Vivian had done. She hadn't just spread rumors about my mental health. She'd convinced everyone that I was a traumatized veteran hiding my pain behind a facade of strength. "I'm not struggling," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "I'm succeeding. I'm doing exactly what I've always wanted to do." But Vivian was ready for this response. She'd coached them well. "That's exactly what someone with PTSD would say," she replied softly, shaking her head with practiced sadness. "Denial is part of the process. We've all done research." The research, of course, consisted of cherry-picked articles and statistics that Vivian had been feeding them for months. She'd turned my family into unwitting accomplices in her character assassination. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I couldn't tell them the truth yet. My assignment was too sensitive, too classified. But in a few months, when I returned, I would find a way to show them exactly who their daughter, their sister, their granddaughter really was. Vivian had no idea what was coming. The special assignment took me to a joint task force operation that I still can't fully discuss. What I can say is that it involved intelligence analysis at the highest levels, working alongside some of the most brilliant minds in the military. The work was intense, the hours were brutal, and the pressure was unlike anything I'd experienced. It was also the most important thing I'd ever done. For 4 months, I lived and breathed this mission. I analyzed patterns that others had missed, identified threats that could have had catastrophic consequences, and contributed to operations that made headlines around the world, though my role remained invisible to the public. When it was over, my commanding officer called me into his office. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said, using my formal rank. "What you accomplished over these past months was extraordinary. The intelligence you provided directly led to the successful completion of Operation Desert Shield. You should be proud." Operation Desert Shield. I'd heard whispers about it in the news. A counterterrorism operation that had prevented a major attack and resulted in the capture of several high-value targets. The media was calling it one of the most successful intelligence operations in recent history, and I'd been part of it. "There's more," my commanding officer continued. "Based on your performance, you're being recommended for the Intelligence Achievement Medal. The ceremony will be public, and there will be media coverage. I hope you're ready for some well-deserved recognition." I thought about my family back home, still convinced I was a broken veteran hiding her struggles behind a brave face. I thought about Vivian, still spreading her carefully crafted lies to anyone who would listen, and I smiled. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was back at my regular duty station, preparing for the medal ceremony that was still 2 weeks away. My mother's number flashed on my phone, and for a moment, I considered not answering. Our conversations had become increasingly strained, filled with carefully worded expressions of concern that felt more like accusations, but something in her voice when I finally picked up was different. "Zara? Honey? I need to ask you something." She sounded confused, almost frightened. "There's a reporter here, from the Phoenix Tribune. She says she's trying to reach you about some kind of award." She mentioned Operation Desert Shield. My heart started racing. The story had broken earlier than expected. "Mom, she says you were part of some major intelligence operation, that you're receiving a medal. But that can't be right, can it? I mean, Vivian said you were barely managing to. She said you were struggling just to." The words hung in the air between us. For the first time in 3 years, I heard doubt in my mother's voice, but not doubt about me, doubt about the story she'd been told. "Can you put the reporter on the phone?" I asked quietly. The Phoenix Tribune article ran the next morning with the headline, "Local Air Force Intelligence Analyst Honored for Role in Major Counterterrorism Operation." The story detailed my contributions to Operation Desert Shield, complete with quotes from my commanding officer describing my work as instrumental and exceptional. There was a photo of me in dress uniform, looking confident and professional. The article mentioned my upcoming medal ceremony and described my stellar military career. By noon, my phone was ringing nonstop. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months were calling to congratulate me. Family friends were sharing the article on social media with captions full of pride and amazement. My high school principal called to ask if I'd speak at graduation, but the call I was waiting for didn't come until evening. "Zara," my father's voice was thick with emotion. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was the most difficult of my life. My parents had spent the day piecing together the timeline of my military service, comparing the dates and achievements mentioned in the newspaper article with the stories Vivian had been telling them. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. During the months when she claimed I was barely hanging on, I had been selected for advanced training. When she said I was struggling with severe depression, I was being promoted ahead of schedule. When she insisted I was on the verge of a breakdown, I was being chosen for one of the most important intelligence operations in recent memory. "How could we have been so wrong?" my mother whispered. "How could we have believed? How could we have doubted you?" The answer was simple, though painful to hear. They had believed Vivian because they wanted to. She had given them a version of me that fit their preconceptions, the daughter who had chosen a path they didn't understand, who had rejected their values, who had prioritized strength over femininity. The idea that I might be struggling, that I might need saving, allowed them to maintain their worldview while expressing concern. It was easier to believe I was broken than to accept that I was succeeding in a world they couldn't comprehend. But there was something else we needed to address. "Where is Vivian?" I asked. Vivian had been notably silent since the article broke. Her social media accounts, usually updated multiple times daily with carefully curated content, had gone dark. She wasn't answering calls or texts from family members who wanted to congratulate her on having such an accomplished sister. She was hiding, but I knew where to find her. The coffee shop downtown had always been Vivian's sanctuary, the place she went to craft her Instagram posts and cultivate her image as a sophisticated influencer. She had a regular table by the window where she could see and be seen. When I walked in wearing my dress uniform, conversations stopped. Customers pulled out their phones. The barista recognized me from the newspaper article and started to say something, but I held up a hand and pointed toward the corner. There, hunched over her laptop with sunglasses on despite being indoors, was my sister. She looked up as I approached, and for the first time in our lives, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Hello, Vivian." The conversation that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply sat down across from her and spoke in the same calm, measured tone I'd learned to use when briefing senior officers on matters of national security. 3 years, I said quietly. 3 years of lies. 3 years of poisoning our family against me. 3 years of trying to destroy my reputation while I was serving my country. Vivian's hands shook as she closed her laptop. She looked around the coffee shop as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. You were always so perfect, so strong. Everyone always compared me to you, and I never measured up. I thought if I could make them see that you weren't as perfect as they thought. So you decided to make them think I was broken instead." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but I felt no satisfaction in her pain, only sadness for the time we'd lost, the relationship we'd destroyed, the family gatherings that had been poisoned by her lies. "The worst part," I continued, "is that you convinced them I was weak, that I was a victim, that the thing I'm most proud of, my service, my career, my contributions to this country, was actually evidence of my failure. I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I'll tell them the truth. I'll explain everything." But we both knew it was too late for that. The damage had been done. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair easily. You don't understand, Vivian. You don't get to control the narrative anymore. The truth is already out there. The whole world knows who I really am. The medal ceremony took place 2 weeks later at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The Intelligence Achievement Medal isn't the highest honor in the military, but it's significant. It recognizes exceptional service in the intelligence field, and it's not given lightly. The ceremony was attended by senior military officials, local government representatives, and yes, media. My parents were there, sitting in the front row with expressions of pride and amazement. Extended family members who had flown in from across the country filled the remaining seats. Even my high school principal had made the trip, along with several former teachers who wanted to witness this moment. Vivian was notably absent. As my commanding officer read the citation describing my contributions to Operation Desert Shield, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of doubt, the family interventions, the whispered concerns about my mental health, all of it seemed surreal now, like a bad dream that had finally ended. Staff Sergeant Zara Torres demonstrated exceptional analytical skills and unwavering dedication to duty during her service with Joint Task Force Phoenix, the citation read. Her intelligence analysis directly contributed to the success of Operation Desert Shield and prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil. Her work exemplifies the highest standards of the United States Air Force. The medal felt heavier than I'd expected as it was pinned to my uniform, but it wasn't the weight of medal and ribbon. It was the weight of vindication, of truth finally acknowledged, of a reputation restored. The reception afterward was surreal. Family members who had spent years treating me like a fragile victim were suddenly eager to hear stories about my military service. Cousins who had whispered about my problems were now bragging to their friends about their accomplished Air Force sister. Aunts who had suggested I needed professional help were asking for my autograph. The transformation was as swift as it was complete. "I always knew you were destined for greatness," my grandfather announced, apparently forgetting the intervention he'd organized just months earlier. "The military was the perfect choice for someone with your strength and intelligence." My mother spent the evening introducing me to everyone as my daughter, the war hero, her voice swelling with pride. My father kept pulling out his phone to show people the newspaper article, as if he'd been my biggest supporter all along. It would have been easy to feel bitter about their sudden change of heart, but standing there in my dress uniform, surrounded by the tangible proof of my accomplishments, I found that the anger I'd carried for so long was finally beginning to fade. They had been wrong about me, yes. They had believed lies over truth, rumors over evidence, but they were also family, and family, despite its flaws, was worth fighting for. The real victory came in the weeks that followed. News of my medal ceremony spread beyond our local community. Military publications picked up the story. Veterans organizations reached out to invite me to speak at events. Young women considering military careers contacted me through social media, asking for advice and inspiration. I had become exactly what Vivian had tried to prevent me from being: a role model, a success story, a source of pride for my family and community. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the ceremony, I received a letter at my base. The return address showed it was from a high school in Ohio, a place I'd never been, and a person I'd never met. Inside was a handwritten note from a 17-year-old girl named Ashley, along with a newspaper clipping about my medal ceremony. "Dear Staff Sergeant Torres," the letter began. "My older sister has been telling everyone that I'm too weak to succeed in the military. She says I should focus on more traditional careers because the armed forces would break me. But when I read about your story and your achievements, I realized she's wrong. I'm applying to the Air Force Academy next month, and I wanted to thank you for showing me that strength isn't about what other people think of you. It's about proving them wrong through your actions. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This girl, this stranger, understood something that my own family had taken years to recognize. She saw past the noise and the doubt to the truth underneath. That's when I realized the full scope of what I'd accomplished. It wasn't just about the medal or the recognition, or even proving Vivian wrong. It was about becoming living proof that determination and dedication could overcome any obstacle, including the doubt of those closest to you. Today, 5 years after that Christmas intervention, my relationship with my family has evolved. My parents and I speak regularly now, and our conversations are filled with genuine pride and mutual respect. They've learned to see my military career not as something foreign and frightening, but as a calling that suits my strengths perfectly. Extended family members who once whispered about my problems now introduce me with the kind of reverence usually reserved for celebrities. The change is sometimes uncomfortable in its extremeness, but it's preferable to the alternative. As for Vivian, our relationship remains complicated. She did eventually apologize, publicly and privately. She admitted to the lies she'd spread and tried to make amends with family members she'd misled. But apologies, however sincere, can't undo years of damage. We see each other at family gatherings now, and we're civil. Sometimes we even manage to have normal conversations about neutral topics. But the easy sibling bond we might have had will never exist. Trust, once shattered, leaves scars even after it heals. She's actually doing well now. She found her calling in nonprofit work and seems to have channeled her need for attention into helping others. I'm genuinely happy for her success, even as I remain cautious about our relationship. Looking back, I understand now that Vivian's campaign against me was never really about me. It was about her own insecurities, her own fears of being overshadowed, her own struggle to find her place in the world. She saw my success as evidence of her failure, rather than understanding that we could both succeed in different ways. But her actions, however misguided, taught me something important about resilience and self-worth. When the people who should support you most instead choose to tear you down, you have 2 choices. You can internalize their doubt and become smaller, or you can use their skepticism as fuel to become stronger. I chose strength. Every push-up I did during basic training, I was proving them wrong. Every analysis I completed, every briefing I delivered, every mission I supported, it was all evidence that their limited vision of who I could be was exactly that, limited. The medal ceremony wasn't just recognition for my service to my country. It was vindication for every girl who's ever been told she's too intense, too ambitious, too strong. It was proof that the qualities others see as flaws can actually be your greatest strengths. The final revelation in this story isn't just about proving my family wrong. It's about learning to value yourself based on your own standards, rather than others' expectations. It's about understanding that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who understand you least. And it's about recognizing that success, real, meaningful success, isn't measured by others' approval. It's measured by your own sense of purpose and accomplishment. Today, I'm a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force. I've served on 3 continents, contributed to operations that have made the world safer, and mentored dozens of young airmen who remind me daily why this work matters. I've also become someone that 17-year-old girl in Ohio can look up to when her own sister tries to convince her she's not strong enough. That's worth more than any medal. The rumors have been silenced. The lies have been exposed. The doubt has been erased. But most importantly, the truth has set me free. And that freedom, the freedom to be exactly who I am, without apology or explanation, is the greatest victory of all. You know, sharing this story with you, it reminds me that we all have moments when we feel invisible, when our truth seems buried under others' lies and doubts. If my story touched something in you, if it made you feel a little less alone in your own battles, there's one small thing you could do that would mean the world to me. Most people listen to these stories and move on. They don't hit that subscribe button. But you're not most people, are you? You're someone who understands what it means to fight for your truth. That little red button below this video, it's free. It takes 2 seconds. But for someone like me, sharing these stories of triumph over betrayal, it's everything. It tells me that somewhere out there, someone believes these stories matter. Someone believes that truth always wins in the end. If you're that someone, I'd be honored to have you join this family, because that's what we are here, a family of people who refuse to stay silent when the world tries to bury us. Hit subscribe, and let's rise together.